American Horror Story is one of my favorite shows on TV right now. The show just has this beautiful gothic aura about it. All the characters have this sense of tragedy that just makes them so compelling, and every season has a unique setting that tends to serve as a character of its own. American Horror Story exists as an exploration of horror as a genre, as well as its various subgenres, with every season covering different tropes and subgenres from American horror movies. Each adapting a new story and a new setting with new characters based on those classic archetypes and tropes. Covering anything from slasher movies to satanic panic, blood curses, zombies, or even more relatable real-life fears, things we can't control, like infidelity, addiction, prejudice, or even politics. The show mixes fictional terror with real-life fears and trauma that could happen to anyone, and that makes the show feel so much more unique compared to similar shows in the same genre. And the show really has some compelling character development. And the show manages to do all that without sacrificing the stylization of old school horror media in favor of a more modernized take on the characters. Somehow they all feel campy and compellingly serious at the same time. You see, American Horror Story is equal parts horror story and campy B-movie style soap opera, because that was like half of all horror movies back in the day. At least slasher movies, anyway. The show is an amalgamation of the last 50 years of horror cinema in all the best ways, sometimes even improving and surpassing the original pieces of media that they're paying homage to. Like in the slasher season, 1984, Mr. Jingles is basically a mix of Jason and Michael Myers, and the Night Stalker is basically Freddy. And they do Friday the 13th and Freddy vs. Jason better than Friday the 13th and Freddy vs. Jason did Friday the 13th and Freddy vs. Jason. The fight between these two is one of the best moments of that season, and it's better than any single moment from Freddy vs. Jason. And the conclusion that Mr. Jingles got felt so much more conclusive and fulfilling than any of Jason's endings from any of the 10 or so Friday the 13th movies. American Horror Story proves that the format of primetime television serves the horror genre better than film ever has or ever could. And each season serving as its own self-contained story allows them to explore all these different ideas in really unique ways, all while utilizing character tropes that we're familiar with as a shortcut to make the characters more endearing. And while that sounds kinda cheap and lazy on the surface, it's actually really effective writing. The fact that these character types and tropes are familiar to the audience helps us endear ourselves to the characters faster without much initial development. And because we all know these tropes so well, it makes it that much more of a surprise when the show subverts those tropes by introducing its own twist on the genre or trope that they're presenting. Every season has its own individual oh shit moment that just leaves you longing and hopeless as you watch these characters break past a point of no return. And it's the pain you feel for these characters that keeps me coming back for more. They aren't just generic camp counselor slasher fodder. The bits of character development that would be relegated to throwaway lines in slasher flicks are so much more significant here, and they play much bigger roles in the characters' interactions with each other and their development and arcs throughout the series. You actually find yourself rooting for these characters, wanting to see them grow and prosper instead of wanting to see them, get Jasoned. Which only makes it that much more painfully horrific when you see them on the business end of a machete. The format of a TV show really lets you empathize and grow connections with these characters in a way that a 2-hour movie just wouldn't be able to handle. Its existence as a TV show instead of a movie does a lot to strengthen the old cliches and make them feel new again. So now that we covered the meta-narrative,
certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
Let's talk about the weird lore of American Horror Story. So there's a lot to unpack here, given that every season of American Horror Story is its own narrative. But even though they're all separate stories, every season builds on the lore of the American horror universe in its own way, all while paying homage to different works from classic horror subgenres. Like how 1984 is a slasher season and pays tribute to Evil Dead, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. But even though every season is its own self-contained story, they all reference each other through Easter eggs and a few characters that cross over here and there. And it might be worth note that the show Scream Queens and the anthology series American Horror Stories also take place in the same universe, or within a sub-universe of American Horror Story, but we'll cover that later. We're just going to focus on the first 9 seasons for now. So Season 1 MurderHouse is all about a haunted house and a dysfunctional family, and establishes the rules that haunted places, blood curses, and ghosts follow for the rest of the series. The season deals with feelings of isolation, heartbreak, and utter hopelessness. So here's the story. Ben and Viv were trying to have a baby, but Viv miscarried. Then Ben had an affair with one of his students, and his wife found out about it. Now Ben and his family are moving halfway across the country to restart their lives, and hopefully repair Ben and Viv's broken marriage. But all the while Ben and Vivian are focusing on themselves, their teenage daughter Violet is dealing with missing her old friends, not fitting into her new LA atmosphere, as well as substance abuse, depression, and even suicidal ideation. All while our parents are completely blind to it. Now, notice that I haven't really even touched on the horror stuff yet. The issues that this broken family deals with could never be dealt with in the same way in a 2-hour movie. There just isn't enough time for that level of character development in your typical horror flick. These are relatable human issues, and they serve to make us empathize with our core cast of characters that much more. But again, this is a haunted house season, so let's talk slashers and ghosts. The home has a history of murders and suicides, ranging from serial killers to doctors botching abortions, homicidal patriarchs, and even worse. From the time the house was built to the modern day, people have died in it left and right. But beyond the horrors of the house, it seems like the neighbors and locals know a bit more than they're letting on.
You're gonna die in here.
One of my favorite things about the season is that initially, you don't know who's a ghost and who isn't, or even what the rules of being a ghost are, so you never quite know who's real and who isn't, making things feel that much more tense from episode to episode. There's even a bit of a red herring that throws you off, because there's a thing about the ghost rules on Halloween that only applies on Halloween. And funny enough, all the other shows kind of play off that too. But that not knowing the first time you watch the show makes it a lot more rewatchable for the second viewing, because then on the second viewing you're putting things together that you didn't know the first time. Rewatching a season of American Horror Story is almost like playing a game on New Game Plus. That's the only way I know how to put it. Because once you know who's who and what's what, it makes the foreshadowing in the earlier episodes that much more apparent and the rewatch that much more rewarding. I've honestly rewatched MurderHouse more times than I care to admit. It just never gets old. And I know this is a hot take, but I still kind of love the Tate and Violet story and how they resolve some of its issues with a retcon and apocalypse. Tate and Violet just have that kind of toxic chemistry that Joker and Harley wish they had.
You are my guests to this handsome hunka.
I just love every moment they're on screen together. But okay, moving on. So season 1, Ghosts in a Haunted House, but effective in establishing the setting of the American Horror Story universe. So with that in mind, let's move on to season 2. Season 2 takes place in the 60s, and it's about illegal experiments, aliens, racism, religious corruption, eugenics, homophobia, Nazis, serial killers, and more. I didn't like this season so much the first time I watched it, but I enjoyed it a lot more on the second watch through. The season covers a lot of subjects, and sometimes it bites off a little bit more than it can chew. But even if it was a little bit overambitious, I think it did a lot to set the tone of what we could expect from the series moving forward. There's even a small Easter egg in this season that explains some of the discrepancies of who survived and who didn't in the Season 8 apocalypse.
When the Russians launch their nuclear missiles, 20 million Americans will be incinerated instantly. Another 20 million will suffer a slow, agonizing death. Natural selection would have weeded out the weak, but only over the course of time. Whereas I have managed to improve the species now so that we can survive the atomic blast, live through the radiation, and become dominant once again.
By the way, the 8th season, Apocalypse, is a crossover between the plot points of all the other seasons, but we'll cover that in a bit, so don't worry about it. I just think it's really neat how they planted a seed for Season 8 all the way back in Season 2. I mean, they set up that plot point 6 years ahead of time. Damn. So Season 2 revolves around a reporter who's been falsely imprisoned in an insane asylum after she tries to expose the cruel and inhumane experiments that are being conducted on the patients by the asylum's head doctor. I don't think it's the best season, but I think it's a fun watch. But with that being said, I'll still be the first to admit that it kind of starts to fall apart a little bit in the end. And the stuff with the aliens just feels confusing and unnecessary. But I feel like that's another seed they planted to come back to later. But moving on to Season 3. Coven is mostly about a school of witches. The season delves into the history of witches in America, as well as the infighting between different sects of witches. Layered on top of that are plotlines related to toxic mother-daughter relationships, religious persecution, racism and slavery in the South, as well as acts of vengeance. Personally, I love the Witches of Coven. They're super compelling characters, and the mother-daughter rivalry between Fiona and Cordelia serves as one of the best arcs and plotlines of the entire show. And one of the more interesting subplots revolve around Fiona's struggles with her own mortality and the things that she would do to remain in power. Honestly, this may be one of Jessica Lange's best roles in the series, and that says a lot given how much she brings to the table for every role she plays in the series. Coven establishes a lot of the lore regarding magic, witches, hell, and the demons that live there. The lore regarding witches is really interesting, like the role of the Supreme and the hierarchy of the witches. The lore that gets explored here is stuff that other seasons would never be able to handle with the kind of natural exposition that this one can. Most seasons focus on average people going through supernatural circumstances, but giving us this supernatural perspective helps us learn the ins and outs of the American horror universe in a much more efficient way. For the first time, we get characters that aren't just hapless victims, but instead are active players in the field of the supernatural arts. It's also a crucial season to understand some of the loosely connecting plot threads between the seasons. I mean, Apocalypse is pretty much a direct sequel to this one. But even if this wasn't one of the most lore-heavy seasons, it would still be one of the best. It has a great cast, a great plot line, the New Orleans setting is just beautiful and really feels like a character of its own, and the season just has this excellent execution by everyone involved. It's a phenomenal season, and it's a great starting point if you're new to the show. So the next season, Freak Show, is about a scary circus and the freaks that live there, as well as how society treats them. It has a lot of the same vibes as Asylum, and in fact it even shares a character with Asylum. The season focuses a lot on how society treats the people that it considers to be the other. People who were born different than what society considers to be the norm, and were mocked, ridiculed, and made to feel like a freak for it.
Excuse me? Excuse me. Is there any place else you can eat? You're upsetting my daughter.
Well, I'm sure she'd love the show if she saw it. Tell the ticket lady Jimmy sent you. Well, we're ready to order now.
Like Asylum, Freak Show is far from my favorite season. It's probably one of the worst too, but I think that Evan Peters and Jessica Lange play some really compelling characters that help salvage the season. But again, like Asylum before it, it really starts to fall apart in the last few episodes, which is kind of a recurring theme for the series. There are a lot of shitty endings, but I mean that's okay for me because whatever. I don't watch these shows for the endings, I watch them for the ride along the way. So the finale establishes that the MurderHouse rules also apply to the freaks. So there's a little bit of a happy ending, even though most of the characters have died cruel, tragic, horrible deaths beforehand. They all still get this Lost style ending, which is kinda cute, I guess. It's a weird season, I'm not gonna lie, it's very skippable. I think it's still worth a watch, but I mean, again, no one would blame you if you just skip this one. Hotel does a great job taking the rules that are established in seasons like Coven and MurderHouse and building on them. It's all about a haunted hotel and the spirits and vampires that are trapped there. It's pretty much Hotel California this season. It delves a little bit into real-life superstitions regarding the Tate Hotel, as well as urban legends regarding real-world serial killers and, well, for lack of a better term, their legacies and the mythos that surround them. I know that's definitely not the most PC way to put it, but we'll address that in the video later on. The Hotel Cortez is an old Hollywood hotel that was home to various tragedies and misfortunes throughout the years. It was created by its initial owner, James March, as a maze of winding corridors with dead ends that he could use to kill unsuspecting travelers. Then he would hide their bodies in the walls or inside the secret rooms that he built into the hotel. And of course, because of that, the hotel became haunted, and many of the spirits who died in it still find their souls trapped there to this day. And some don't even realize they're dead. A lot like Coven and MurderHouse, the presence of ghosts and vampires lets the story go way more into the supernatural side of American horror lore. American horror lore? I like that. Horror lore sounds fun. And speaking of vampires, the hotel is run by the Queen of Vampires, Countess Elizabeth, played by none other than the ever so darling and always immaculate Lady Gaga. This is one of the seasons where American Horror Story is full American Horror Story. And what I mean by that is it takes a lot of the old concepts from prior seasons like ghosts and magic and haunted places, and it mixes them with new concepts like vampires and old Hollywood history and even more. It's a really compelling season and has some interesting crossover with Coven and kind of leads straight into Apocalypse. It's just a really fun mishmash of concepts and has some of the best pacing of the series. This is one of American Horror Story's best seasons, and it wouldn't be a bad place to start. Plus, again, and I can't emphasize this enough, Lady Gaga fucking rocks in this role.
I mean, we're just the air conditioners walking around on this planet screwing each other's brains out.
So true. I never thought of it like that.
Oh. Hello, you.
And now we talk about one of the shitty seasons. Well, maybe not shitty, but just less good. Roanoke touches on found footage, true crime, and historical fiction. Specifically, the myth of the Lost Colony. It's pretty unique in the way it tells its story and the way it builds on the lore of the show. So you have this reality show about a real-life haunting, and that's the first half of the season, but the second half of the season switches it up and takes the perspective of the crew filming the second season of that reality show, meaning that every character is played by two different actors, with one being the real version of the character and the other being an actor that's playing that character on the show within the show. If that sounds unnecessarily confusing, it's because it is. This season isn't the worst, but it's not the best either. It might be a little bit better than Asylum or Freak Show, but really not by much, to be honest with you. Cuba Gooding Jr. and Lady Gaga both do standout jobs here, but honestly, it's just a shitty place to start the show at, and no one would blame you if you didn't finish the season. The way they feature the show within a show and the found footage really doesn't add much to the narrative at all. Honestly, it's kind of distracting and confusing. The found footage moments never provide any good scares, and the reality show format just feels too tongue-in-cheek. The series would do way better if it followed a typical structure instead of changing genres halfway through the season and expecting people to just roll with it. Plus, nothing that happens in this season ever gets referenced anywhere else in the show. There's no other season that makes any references or allusions to this one. You could really just skip the season and never even notice it in the long run. Now season 7 is about real-life horror. It expresses that through the election and the social ramifications it had for families, minorities, and other disenfranchised folk, and it also showcases how hateful ideology spreads in people who normally wouldn't succumb to it. Slight spoilers here, maybe fast forward about a minute to avoid it, but this season doesn't actually feature any supernatural terrors that are truly magic in nature. And I think that's because the rest of the American Horror Story universe exists as a show or movie inside the cult universe. Kinda like how the Kill Bill movies are movies themselves inside the Tarantino universe. The only bit of info that really furthers that theory is that there's only one reference to another season inside a cult. Twisty the Clown from Freak Show shows up inside of a comic book that's read by this kid. And that's it. That's the only reference. When you consider the last episode of the spinoff, American Horror Stories, and how that's about a game developer that's making a game based on the American Horror Story universe, you can kind of assume that episode might also take place inside the cult universe, but there are a few reasons that could be wrong as well. You know, maybe it's best to just not think of it too much. Alright, thank you. Next. Trick or treat, Super Swim Team. Just taking a second to pay some bills and talk shop. If you're impatient, then go ahead and skip to this timestamp on screen to get back to the video. In case you didn't know already, this is the second video of Spooky Grim Scream Halloween. You can find more of our channel's Halloween videos here in this playlist that should be popping up as a card on screen above. I got videos on Silent Hill, Venom and Hulk, Dead Man, Sabrina, and even one on Twilight. So if you're interested, go check those out once the video wraps up. And I'd also like to mention that we got stickers at SuperSwimTeam7.com, so go check those out if that's your thing. And lastly, we got a few Patreon goals that we're aiming for as well. The first reward will be a video retrospective series on the Spider-Man PS2 games. The second will be a Patreon-exclusive video on risque art and comic book media. And the third goal is a DCAU retrospective series, covering everything from Zeta Project to JLU. You can check out the playlist in one of these end cards, you can check out our stickers at SuperSwimTeam7.com, and you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/SuperSwimTeam7. Links to all those will be in the description box down below. Now let's get back to that video. Happy Halloween, everybody! So Apocalypse is about, well, the apocalypse. And it kind of crosses over seasons 1 and 3, and builds on the references and lore that were established in Asylum and Hotel. So big spoiler warning again, maybe skip to this timestamp if you're sensitive to them, because this is going to be the section where we go hard into the spoilers. Everything in the show culminates and crosses over here, with Apocalypse being the only real season that follows up on any of the plot lines from the other shows, like the birth of the Antichrist at the end of season 1, or the missing witches and magic hierarchy in season 3. This is definitely not the season to start with, but it builds on the lore of all the other seasons in a really satisfying way. So if you've seen the rest of them, you'll really dig this one. It starts off slow, but as soon as the witches show up in episode 3, the season just goes balls to the walls in all the best ways. You know, not a lot of people like this season, but it's one of my personal favorites. I love the world building aspect of it, and I love how it connects different plot threads from MurderHouse, Asylum, and Hotel all into one cohesive narrative. The references to other seasons aren't just Easter eggs, they're bona fide plot points. So here's the gist of Apocalypse. There's a secret Illuminati called the Collective, and they're comprised of people who sold their soul to Satan. They're a bunch of Hollywood elites, Silicon Valley tech bros, oil tycoons, basically any 1%er that you could imagine. And they're all waiting on the Antichrist to usher in the final days, that way they can reshape the earth in their own image. At the end of MurderHouse, the child of a ghost and a human was born, and that was the Antichrist. And Apocalypse features the Antichrist taking his place as both head warlock and the head of the Illuminati. He starts the apocalypse, and the witches from season 3 have to take him down and stop it. It's really fun on the rewatch, and has a lot of nods to the other seasons. This is basically the Avengers 2012 of American Horror Story, and I think that's why it's my favorite. But like I said, a lot of people didn't like it, and I think that's why the next season was more of a standalone. If you want to see exactly why people didn't like it, I would definitely recommend Elvis the Alien's video. So anyway, moving on to 1984, season 9 is basically a slasher movie and a love letter to all things
80s.
This season has the best intro. It's just so aesthetic, and the music is killer. I couldn't get Gaja Gugu's Too Shy out of my head for 2 weeks after I started writing this video. Characters like Montana, Jingles, and Margaret are just some of my favorites out of the entire series. It's mind-blowing how the show manages to feel so fresh after 9 years, and especially with such a fucking cliche trope like slasher movies. I'm not gonna lie, the season has a pretty lackluster ending, but I can kind of forgive it for the sake of how the rest of the season is. You won't find many references or connections to other seasons here, but it still does a good job building on the rules about ghosts and haunted burial grounds. And the characters stand alone well enough on their own that it really doesn't matter. I know I said MurderHouse, Coven, and Apocalypse were my favorites, but honestly, 1984 really is too. All 4 of those are just great in my opinion. So if you're looking for a place to start, I'd say MurderHouse, Coven, or 1984. Those are my personal favorite seasons. Hotel is really good too, but it has some crossover with Coven, so I'd maybe watch that after Coven. So now that we covered the lore season to season, let's get a little bit deeper into it. I love how fluid the continuity of American Horror Story is. It treats continuity almost like a comic book universe in the way that the series is constantly world building and changing and shifting with every given season. And kinda similarly to comics, it's also easy to explain away inconsistencies given the time travel and apocalypse. In Doctor Who, any inconsistencies in canon can be explained away by the butterfly effect, altering something through time travel in an otherwise unrelated story. In American Horror Story Hotel, John references the Night Stalker's death as it occurred in the real world, but in 1984 we're shown that the Night Stalker had been trapped at Camp Redwood since 1984, conflicting with John's story in Hotel. But the existence of time travel and apocalypse means that both versions of Ramirez can coexist, with one being the version of the Night Stalker that came before the timeline change, and the other existing as the iteration that came after, just like a comic or in Doctor Who. But outside of that, I always thought it was really neat how the lore of American Horror Story is so consistent season to season. Like how the rules for MurderHouse carry over into other seasons like Hotel or 1984. Another one of those rules that carries over revolves haunted places. A Hellmouth is created when an inordinate number of tragedies occur in a single setting. Evil entities take root and inflict pain and suffering so severe that the emotional impact has a resonating effect on the surrounding area, leaving it haunted by the spirits that are trapped there due to the lingering presence of evil, creating a Hellmouth that serves as a portal straight to hell. If you die in a haunted place or in a Hellmouth, your ghost becomes stuck there for all eternity. Well, except for Halloween, which is the only day of the year that ghosts can go wherever they want. But because you don't know that Halloween rule at first, or any of the rules for ghosts or Hellmouths in general, or even who is or isn't a ghost, it makes the show that much more mysterious and rewatchable once you finally put things together. So if you know the rules for the MurderHouse ghosts, you can kind of apply that same logic to other seasons to help figure out who the ghosts in Hotel or 1984 are. But if you're a first-time viewer, you've got to figure that out just like the characters on screen, making the viewer feel kind of like an active participant in the story as they're trying to put things together. And I think that's one of the big appeals of the show for me. But beyond lore, there are even a few characters that exist across multiple seasons to kind of tie everything together. Lana Winters is the main character of season 2 and a survivor of the Asylum. She pops up a few more times interviewing other characters from different seasons that survive similar tragedies. And another character played by Sarah Paulson is the psychic Billie Dean. She first appears in MurderHouse and is actually the first character who's uniquely supernaturally inclined. But in that season, it's left vague and open-ended whether her powers are real or not. But as time goes on, we actually find out she's pretty legit. Having characters cross over season to season like this really serves to build the backbone of the American horror universe. Kind of like how Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. served as the backbone for Phase 1 of the MCU. So, with all the lore out of the way, now we kinda gotta get into the icky stuff. The problematic horror story. American Horror Story does have some issues in regards to how it portrays mental illness and real-world serial killers. They tend to glorify mental illness in a weird way, treating it like a gift in a cringy Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland kind of way.
Have I gone mad? You're entirely bonkers. But I'll tell you a secret. All the best people are.
And the way the show glamorizes real-life serial killers in a way that kind of deifies them just feels gross. And it's pretty disrespectful to the victims of those killers and their surviving family members. Especially when the show acknowledges that some of these people did it for the recognition and notoriety, and then the show gives those killers the recognition and notoriety that they wanted in the first place.
Wait a second. I know you. You're Richard Ramirez. Your picture's all over the news. Cops looking for you. Holy shit! The Night Stalker? You killed like 17 people.
That was gonna be number 18 until you fucked it up.
No, hold up. I'm like a huge fan. No, seriously, you're a major inspiration. I'm kind of trying to get into the blood game, aiming for a big body count. Bigger than yours, even.
While stuff like fandoms for mass murderers and people obsessed with them are unfortunately a thing that occurs in real life, the show really doubles down on it by having people so obsessed with serial killers that they dress up as them to scare people, or even by having wealthy moguls buy up haunted properties where tragedies occurred just to turn them into tourist destinations. But you know, again, this does happen in real life too, and it's not right there either. Honestly, I think it's pretty predatory to take advantage of someone else's tragedy for your own financial gain. But that fascination with the morbid and macabre in our own world is doubled down on in the lore and world of American Horror Story. The show acknowledges our fascination with that sort of thing and then stretches it to its logical extreme. The show also builds on real-life folktales and superstitions by utilizing real people, religions, and events. From its usage of Anton LaVey to references to Operation Paperclip, its portrayal of Satanism and Apocalypse, or even Coven's portrayal of Marie Laveau and Voodoo, as well as its fictionalized depiction of the real-life horrors that Madame Lalaurie inflicted on her slaves in the 1800s. Now, on one hand, maybe that could spread awareness about these historical events and figures. I mean, the show definitely made me aware of some historical events I wouldn't have been aware of otherwise. I had never heard of Madame Lalaurie, or the poor men and women who suffered under her. And other shows have kind of done this as well. Like, I had no idea that the Tulsa Massacre ever happened until I saw it on Watchmen, and that seems like something they should definitely teach in schools. But on the other hand, the way the fictionalized versions of these events could lead to misinformation, and the way it tends to glorify the perpetrators of these acts of violence seems kind of problematic to say the least. Watchmen treated the Tulsa Massacre with respect, using its horror to make us empathize with the plight of our protagonist. But American Horror Story does the opposite, and uses those real-life events to glorify real-world serial killers. Now obviously the show is fictional, and these are all fictionalized versions of real-life people. And I'm not trying to make you feel guilty for enjoying it. I mean, it's one of my all-time favorite shows. But I still feel like I need to point out that the show has its fair share of problems. But in a way, that problematic aspect of the show is also kind of what makes it so interesting. It uses real-life American history to craft its own sense of American mythology, its own American horror stories that are based on American culture, media, and mythos. And unfortunately, true crime is only growing in popularity, becoming more and more ingrained in American culture. So in that regard, maybe it makes sense that American Horror Story draws from it? I don't know. I don't have any definitive answers. I think we're all just gonna have to come to our own conclusions about things. But maybe it's worth note that history as it's told, as it's recorded, and as it actually happened are often three separate things. And when something hits the news in a big way, like a serial killer, it has a resonating impact on the culture of the era.
Of the so-called Night Stalker. He's the sadistic killer wanted for a series of murders and rapes.
Some children allege that a living creature was sacrificed on the church's altar.
The truth about Satanism is they truly do use blood, and they mix it with urine, and then they also use the real meat, the real flesh. This is what makes Satanism true.
Now dubbed the Night Stalker, the crime spree covers 50 miles. The suspect varies the time, place, and type of attack, but he always enters through an open door or window.
You can even see this reflected in one of Murphy's other shows, American Crime Story. But that American mythology plays a big role in American Horror Story. And the way the show takes these cultural events and manages to twist them in a way that kind of fits the lore of the show is kind of similar to how Tarantino does that with Inglourious Bastards or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm not saying the way things play out isn't problematic, just that American Horror Story isn't the only piece of media to portray alternate fictionalized version of real life history, or even real life serial killers for that regard.
Fuck you, Jack!
But I think that's just an extension of how media in general views the past through the lenses of nostalgia. Their rose-tinted glasses ignore the problems of the past in favor of just adapting the general aesthetics of that era instead. And there are no two characters that exemplify this more than Trevor and Montana. This show can be really cheesy and melodramatic at times, but honestly I kinda love that, because a lot of the movies that it takes inspiration from were pretty campy too. But people forget that because they just remember the kills instead. And you know, that's cool. I mean, it was pretty much the entire thesis to Elvis the Aliens video on American Horror Story, but it seems like all the things he hated in those videos were all the things I kind of love about the show. There's this scene in 1984 where a survivor comes back to the campground, the site of his worst nightmares, and he finds his former lover's ghost. All while he was stuck dealing with the trauma of that night out in the real world. The world was changing around him, becoming something that he didn't recognize anymore. But when he came back to that camp, he still recognized her. In all those years, she hadn't changed a bit.
Ghosts get high?
No, but it feels nice to pretend. We can feel fleeting pleasure. We can feel pain, we can feel scared, happy, in love, but the only feeling that really lasts is a constant longing.
For what?
To be alive, to be dead, to be anything but stuck here. That's why I'm gonna kill everyone that steps foot in this place. Maybe the publicity will bring someone that'll help us get out of here. And if that doesn't work, then there'll just be more people for fun and sex and groovy conversation. But really, I just want to be distracted.
What if I stay here? I can check all those boxes. Fun and sex, groovy conversation, definitely a lot of distracting. I just want to be with you. I love this place. I love you. It all just feels like home to me.
You do that for me?
There's nothing back there for me. The 80s are over. People don't even do coke anymore. Fashion is boring, lots of flannel. Oh, good luck finding an aerobics class. I love you, Montana. Your 80s forever.
The ghosts of the people that were killed on that night were trapped there forever, but being eternally damned to a place that's forgotten by time seemed better to him than living in a world that he doesn't understand anymore. So he chooses to end his own life to stay with her, rather than live another moment in a world that's left him to be forgotten. He chooses 80s forever, and this scene, as cheesy as it is, still tugs at my heartstrings.
Look around, Ding Dong. You're not in Camp Redwood anymore. You're on the other side of the property line. So if you die here, dead is all you'll ever be. And you will never see that bitch again.
I cried so hard at this, just begging, just praying for Trevor to make it across that line to be with his true love forever. We like to glorify the past and explore the things that we're nostalgic for, while simultaneously ignoring or forgetting the bad things about that era. But because we only remember the good things and block out the bad, it makes Trevor's desire to go back to a time in a world that he understood relatable. Trevor wants to go back to a time when the only things that mattered were slinging dick and doing blow. And I mean, you know, don't we all just want to go back to a simpler time when things didn't matter? Where our responsibilities were less severe? When the world wasn't so crazy and we could actually feel a sense of security and confidence? Wouldn't we all want to go back to an idealized version of your past that never really existed in the first place? So yeah, of course the line is silly and it's hard to take seriously, but as someone who digs cheesy soap operas, it just hits. And if it doesn't for you, I'm sorry, but it just really moves me. It makes my heart cry out for more. This show has just made me feel so much raw emotion. I remember breaking down in tears after the reveal that Violet was dead in MurderHouse. It's the moment that she finds her own body that broke me. The first time I saw the scene, I just can't explain it. I can't explain how or why or what it made me feel. I just remember this feeling of complete despair and hopelessness washing over me. And it's so seldom that a show can make me feel emotion like that. But you know what? That's what real fear is, in my opinion. That is so much better than a jump scare. It's not being chased by a boogeyman, it's not a spooky ghost knocking over a lamp, it's fucking something up so bad it can't be fixed. A cheating spouse, an accidental death, losing your job, losing your family, getting in an accident while driving drunk, watching your dreams waste away and losing yourself in pain and hopelessness. Things you lost but can never get back. Things that can't be fixed. That's true fear, and those are the things that keep me up at night. So getting back to the lore of it, the American Horror Story universe is larger than ever. The newest season, Double Feature, actually has 2 stories. One about a black pill that makes you a vampire or a zombie depending on if you're talented or not, and another story about aliens. Then American Horror Story has its own spin-off called American Horror Stories, and American Horror Stories takes a Twilight Zone style approach, with every episode being its own self-contained story in that universe. I was a big fan of some episodes like Feral, and then not as big a fan of other episodes. And there's also rumors that Ryan Murphy is going to cross over American Horror Story with another Murphy horror show, Scream Queens, which has a lot of the same actors as American Horror Story. And it's been implied in interviews that Scream Queens and American Horror Story are in the same universe. But I've never actually seen Scream Queens, so I can't really comment on that. But beyond that, Murphy said that the witches are going to return, and FX has renewed American Horror Story through season 13. Which means we can expect to see at least 3 more seasons after Double Feature. So with all that in mind, I might do another American Horror Story video depending on how this one turns out. If I did, I'd probably focus on Double Feature, American Horror Stories, and Scream Queens. So if you want to see that in the future, let me know. Be sure to do the YouTube things, like and subscribe with the notification bell on, and let me know in them comments that you want to see the next one. But outside of that, What do you want to see out of American Horror Story in the future? I'm actually really excited for the alien plot of Double Feature and how that's going to tie in and kind of wrap up some of the plot lines from Asylum. So with all that being said, I've got some more Halloween videos here, covering everything from Venom and the Hulk to Silent Hill 3, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and even Twilight of all things. I like to think that my comic book YouTube channel becomes a horror channel every October. So if you want to see my spooky Grim Scream Halloween videos, check them out here. With all that being said, I'd like to give a shout out to my lovely supporters on Patreon. Thank you very much for all the support. And with all that being said, I've been Swim Team Captain 7 of Super Swim Team 7. Signing off.